Welcome back to the Hive. Welcome back, everybody. And we have a really great show today. We're going to go ahead and talk Speedway. And we want to welcome you bees to the Hive. And we are streaming live everywhere. So we hope you enjoy the show today, because today we have a really great show. And if you like the video on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. That way you won't miss a thing, and ring that bell, because we have some great shows coming up. Tomorrow night we have Motormouth Larry Huffman. He's going to be in the Hive. We're going to talk about the Huffman Shuffle and the early days Speedway. He was an amazing announcer. Larry Huffman was one of the very best. Him and Bruce Flanders was the ultimate Speedway announcers. Rest in peace, Bruce Flanders. But we have the Motormouth Larry Huffman in the Hive. And then a couple days later, on Saturday morning, we have the two-time world champion Bruce the Fox Penhall. We have Juicy Brucey in the Hive. And we're going to have a lot of fun with Bruce Penhall. We're going to talk Speedway. We're going to talk United States Championships, 2 of them, and World Championships. We're going to get to know Bruce Penhall, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking to him about Speedway and what made Bruce the world champion that he was. We have a championship show, and today we have a United States champion. We have an early day Speedway champion, and this guy was good. He could ride a motorcycle. And he was a hard charger. And specifically, we're going to talk about early day Speedway. And we're going to talk about a very legendary rider, a very famous rider. This guy was really good. His name is Courtney Milne. He's right above us here, Courtney Milne. He was good. And Courtney was born April 14th, 1914 in Buffalo, New York. And his family went ahead and left the Buffalo area and migrated west. Go west, young man, to California. And they went ahead and settled in Pasadena, California. Just as a young child, Courtney's family packed their bags and moved. There was no Speedway probably in New York at the time. But now Jason has Speedway over in Owego, New York at the Champion Speedway. So, hey, Jason. But Courtney was a little older, so there was no Speedway, I think, in New York at the time. And he just went ahead and had a street bike when he was a kid. Courtney was a motorcycle guy, like all of us. We all love motorcycles, right? We like those things. And Courtney had a job as a messenger boy. Courtney Milne was a messenger boy for Western Union. I guess before the computer age, I guess they would put like money in an envelope and then give it to the guys and say, here, Courtney, go deliver this money to customers in Pasadena or Los Angeles area. So Courtney Milne would get on his motorcycle and he would deliver that money to the customers. So that was a pretty fun job for a motorcycle rider, delivering money for Western Union. But nowadays, they don't do that anymore. Why? Because they have the computer age now. So this was 20s or something, before they had, before they had the computer and things like that. So this was in the old days of Western Union. And that was pretty neat that they went ahead and delivered money by hand. I wish they would deliver me money by hand. I would like that one. And also the worker, he had a co-worker named Wilbur Lamoureux, and Wilbur, his name was Lammy. I guess they didn't want to call him Wilbur, they called him Lammy. And Lammy also worked for the Western Union. He was a delivery boy, just like Courtney. So they were like co-workers, at the same place in Pasadena. They were workmates, and they were delivery boys on the motorcycle. So you had Wilbur and you had Courtney. as delivery boys for the money at Western Union. And I bet they were fast. I bet when they got the money, they're like, they get there, here's your money, and then take off. Wilbur and Cordy were delivery boys. I like that one. That sounds like my job. I don't want that job. No, I don't want that job. And so that's what happened. And Cordy actually used his job over at Western Union to save his money. You know, Cordy was a very thrifty guy, a smart guy, like his brother, his older brother, Jack. They're smart guys. And they didn't just work and go spend it on, stupid stuff. They saved their money for their future. They were thinking of like the future. So that was really good. And they went ahead and saved their money. And Cordy went ahead and saved his money for his first racing bike. It was like a Speedway bike, but it wasn't a Speedway bike. He went ahead and took this bike and then he fixed it up and then he converted it into a Speedway bike. So Courtney Milne bought like a dirt bike and then he changed the handlebars and stuff and he made a Speedway bike out of that bike. So that was pretty ingenious. He didn't probably have that much money for a real Speedway bike, so he made his Speedway bike from a dirt bike. And he started racing that converted Speedway bike, that dirt bike made Speedway bike. Courtney Milne was racing that in the early days in America, the Pasadena, Los Angeles area. They had like races and stuff. And Courtney started making some money. Courtney was bringing home some bacon from that racing in those early days, and everybody's eyes lit up. Like, for example, Wilbur, they go to work the next day, and then Wilbur would say, like, how did you do motorcycle riding? And Cordy would show him the wad of money he made, probably more money than they made like in a month or two. And Wilbur was like, wow, that's really cool. So these guys' eyes were starting to open up because Cordy was the leader. He was the first guy in that pack of friends to actually race and to buy a motorcycle and to bring home some money, a stack of money. And Wilbur Lammy, he went ahead and liked that. And he went ahead and quit the Western Union. Like, forget the Western Union. Let's go ahead and buy a Speedway bike and make lots of money. So Wilbur followed Cordy. Cordy quit, and then Wilbur quit, and then Wilbur bought his first Speedway bike later. So that was a pretty neat story where they started racing because they saw Cordy success and Cordy making lots of money in those days. Of course, maybe today it wasn't a lot of money, but back in those early days, in 1920, late 20s, in the 20s, it was really good money. I mean, people had to work hard for a nickel, and they were making a stack of dollars. So that was really great. And so next you had like the older brother of Cordy. You had Jack Milne. Do you remember who Jack Milne was? I think everybody here knows Jack Milne. He was pretty famous. And he was the senior of Cordy by 7 years. So he was 7 years older than Cordy, and he was a little more mature as far as age-wise goes. And he actually was a good businessman his whole life. Jack Milne was a genius also. And when he was younger at that time, he owned a service station, a gas station. He was pumping gas in the cars. In the early days, they had those 1920 Model T Fords, and Jack Milne was pumping the gas for those early day Model T cars. That was pretty cool. But Jack wasn't making probably big money doing that. You know, you make a little bit here and there, which is okay. But Jack also saw, like Wilbur saw, that Cordy was making a lot of money racing Speedway in those days. And Jack was like shocked. He was surprised. And Jack just said, you know what? This is really great. And I'm going to sell this service station and we're going to go racing Speedway. So Jack went ahead as the good businessman. He followed the money. You know, Jack Milne follows the money. Wherever the money is, you'll see Jack Milne going there in those days. And that's exactly what Jack did. He went ahead and sold that service station. Then he went ahead and ordered from England 2 brand new JAP Comfort Speedway bikes from England. He actually had them shipped from England, which I could see these shiny new, brand new JAPs in the coming. And Jack went ahead and said, Cordy, we're going to be racing some new Speedway bikes. We're going to get rid of that old dirt bike of yours, sell it, and we're going to have brand new JAP Speedway bikes. They actually start mass producing them in about 1927 in England. So they went ahead and actually bought probably the first JAP Speedway bikes ever made. And JAP Speedway bikes were fantastic. I mean, if you look at those JAPs in 1927, those were fast bikes, and JAPs built really well, and they're really excellent motorcycles. So when Jack Milne bought those 2 Speedway bikes from his gas station money, he bought some really good racing equipment. So you had this really good bikes, these brand new JAPs from England, and you had Jack and Courtney Milne, 2 really good Speedway riders, riding those bikes. And so that's going to equal, some really big success when you have brand new fast bikes, plus you have 2 really talented and great riders, and then the rest is going to be history after that. So that was really great. And in 1925, just about when Cordy was just getting involved in Speedway, or a little before, about that time, was the first United States Speedway champion. They had the first, and that was Sprouts Elder. We did a blog on Sprouts Elder a couple years ago. He was a little guy, and then he started growing, and then they said he's sprouting like a sprout. So that's how they got the name Sprouts Elder. So if any of you guys were tall, you don't want the name really Sprout. And I guess somebody told me on the Facebook or something that Ivan Major, they started naming him Sprouts, and I was like, what? And because he was growing tall. So back in the early days, if you grow tall, they call you Sprouts, and if you're small, they call you Shorty. So that was kind of funny how they talked in those early days in the 20s. We don't do that anymore. We would probably punch them in the face if they did that. So that's pretty funny. And that's how that started. So anyway, Sprouts was the first United States Speedway champion in 1925, and that was almost 100 years ago today. So Sprouts Elder was the first U.S. Speedway champion in that year, 1925. And only about 9 or 10 years later, Courtney Milne, the great Courtney Milne, right here, where is it? And there's his wife right here, wherever she is, right here. And Courtney won back-to-back United States Speedway championships. He won back-to-back championships 2 times in 1934 and 1935. He was winning those Speedway championships. So we have, just 9 years later, we have Courtney Milne following Sprouts Elder as a United States Speedway champion. And so Courtney was a really good rider. And with all that fame and notoriety they got as being champions, and Jack was no slouch. I mean, he was like right behind Courtney, I think, on the podium. Those guys were like 1 and 2 like the whole time. So these guys were fast, but Courtney got the best of Jack in those days, in the early days. And so they actually got a contract to go ahead and sign and to race in England. So Jack and Courtney, they went ahead and said, hey, we can make more money. Follow the money. Follow the money. And Jack and Courtney went ahead and followed the money to England and the United Kingdom. And they start racing Speedway there in 1936. They were searching for fame and glory. And Jack and Courtney, they found it. So that was really neat that they both veered off. I bet it was hard in those days to go to England. You know, you take the boat or something, the slow boat to to England. And everything was difficult in those days. You know, like travel probably wasn't as easy as it is today. And so that was pretty neat that these early day guys like Cordy and Jack, they traveled really, it was a hard life. And Sprouse Elder in those early days, they all traveled all around. I mean, they really had a tough time, you know, just getting to track, I'm sure. But getting back to Cordy, his first team upon arrival in the United Kingdom was the Hackney Wick Wolves in 1936. Can you say the Hackney Wick Wolves 100 times? Hackney Wick Wolves, Hackney Wick Wolves, Hackney Wick Wolves. I said it 3 times. That's a hard thing to say 100 times. Hackney Wick Wolves. And he raced at Hackney at the Hackney Stadium. I've been to Hackney Stadium. And that's a crazy stadium. I mean, it's big, it's long, fast, and it's a dangerous track to ride. But Cordy went ahead and raced there for a few years. And his brother Jack followed. They actually, I think, went together. And they actually received instant success. Jack and Cordy were like instant heroes. They were famous in England and all over Europe, really. And these guys were famous not because they were Americans, but they were really good riders. So Jack and Cordy, they went ahead and became famous because of their speedway talent and ability, not because of where they came from. And they became really like famous with newspaper ads. They had newspaper ads. They were on like trading cards, like bubblegum cards. They were on cigarette packs. They were in the newspaper ads everywhere. You'd start seeing Jack and Courtney Milne all over the place. And they became, here's a trading card right here. Do I see my finger? There's Courtney and and it's like I think that was a cigarette pack or a trading card, one of those two. I don't know. But they were famous and they made money when they were, you know, doing the advertising and stuff. And it was really great. And these guys just became really famous. They started making more money in England than they could have in America. So Jack and Cordy actually made really the right move by going to England and making pretty good money. That was really great. And so with all that notoriety and stuff, it just the money started pouring in. I mean, these guys started making money, which is really great. And the Milne brothers became instant celebrities, and that's really great. Jack did not race with Cordy, though. It would have been kind of neat if they're on the same team, but they didn't race together. And also, Jack raced for the New Cross Lambs in New Cross. Jack Milne was a lamb. Did you know that one? He was a lamb, and he doesn't really look like a lamb, if you ask me. But Jack Milne raced for the Lambs and New Cross. And it's about that time in 1936, around his first year, I guess Cordy had a girlfriend from the United States, and her name is like Lil Straiter. I don't know how to say her name. She doesn't have an easy name. And she brought this lady he ended up marrying to England. And they married in 1936. And she enjoyed the newfound fame from her husband, Cordy. And that was his first wife. And she was just like, she liked the attention. She liked Cordy's wife. She kind of liked everything about it. The glitz, the glamour. She was all about like that. And I guess the marriage didn't last only a few years, like maybe 3 years or 4 years. And they ended up getting divorced. And I guess she was kind of like a striptease dancer. She was a movie star making kind of, in those days, I saw some pictures of her. I didn't really want to talk about her, but I'll talk about her. Some of you will hate me, but oh, who cares? But this lady still, she was like a Hollywood, like, striptease lady. And I think that's why Cordy didn't like her, because she was kind of wild. And I didn't know Cordy, so I can't really tell you everything about him. But I can tell you he probably was a fairly good guy, conservative. And then he had this woman who gone wild on him. And in those days, like in the 20s and 30s, like the 30s, the ladies were kind of conservative. Like they wore lots of clothes and stuff. And this lady, she was really wild, and she wore this like really wild lingerie. And did you ever see that movie Elvira, the TV show back in the 80s, 70s, or 80s? Elvira was wearing those skimpy outfits, and they came from this lady, Seal. She went ahead and inspired all these really wild, risque uniforms, outfits, these bras and stuff. But back in those days, they didn't do that very much. Like, it was a conservative time in history. And this lady, Seal, she was pretty wild. And there's a movie, I don't want to talk about this too much, but it's kind of fun. There's a movie called Rocky Horror Picture Show. Do you remember the Rocky Horror Picture Show? It was like the 1970s or 80s. It's an old movie. I never saw it, but I have some wild friends. They love it. And at the end of the movie, I guess they talk about this lady Seal, and this lady that we're talking about, Courtney's first wife. She was, I guess, a wild lady, and she was actually mentioned in that movie, Rocky Horror Picture Show. And like I said, I never saw that movie. It sounds pretty wild, but she was kind of a wild character in those days because it was a conservative time in history. And so Cordy had enough of that lady and said, you got to go. And she was kind of a handful, I think. And I don't think they fit very well. And he went ahead and remarried a nice lady the next time. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So that was kind of the history of that first wife. And it was really interesting. And I saw she made movies, and she was like a pole dancer, and she was like a wild one. That was kind of wild and fun. Okay, getting back to Speedway. Let's talk Speedway. Forget these girls. Some of these girls cause lots of trouble, and we're going to talk Speedway right now. Okay, so his childhood friend, Lammy Lamoureux, he went ahead and became a hard charger, and he followed his friend Cordy the following year in 1937. He actually left United States a year later and joined his friends in England, and they were racing. And he was racing from 1937 to 1939 for the Wimbledon Dons. Wilbur was a Wimbledon Don, and I heard that track was a little rowdy and a little rough. And then I heard Scott Autry loved that track. So maybe it was a good track, maybe it was a bad track. Who knows? But Wilbur went ahead and was riding that track. And it seemed like he did really well for the Dons, the Wimbledon Dons. So in 1937, it was a historic year. The same year that Lammy went ahead and raced. Actually, going back a second, in 1936, Cordy went ahead, was raced in the World Championship, and he placed 4th place in the World Championship. Courtney Milne went over to England and was in 4th place, his very first rookie year. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, God, you go over there, fresh, cold turkey. England's hard, you know, the weather's different than California. Everything is probably rough in those days, especially in those 1930s. And he got 4th place in the World Championship. And that was really great. Cordy was amazing. And then, like I say, in 37, you had Wilbur and you had Cordy and Jack, all 3 of them in the World Championship race. And then all 3 of them were on the podium, which is historic. And all 3 were Americans. And all 3 were from Pasadena, California. That is probably going to be the last time you will ever see 3 riders from America on the World Championship podium. And it's the last time you're ever going to see 3 riders from America from the same city, Pasadena, California, on the podium in the World Championship. That is insane. I mean, you're never going to find that one. For the rest of your life, it will never happen. I will put money on that one. So that was pretty amazing. And that was just really great. Every time I hear Pasadena, I always think of that little old lady from Pasadena. Do you remember that song? I always sing that song. It's like my favorite song. The little old lady from Pasadena. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, forget it. But these guys were not the little old lady from Pasadena. They were the world champions. They were the amazing Milne brothers and Lammy Lamoureux. And Lammy was just an amazing rider. So you had Jack Milne, the 37 world champion. He was on the podium at the top. And then you had Lammy from Pasadena in second place, which is pretty darn good. And then you had brother Cordy in third place. And you had the whole podium full of Pasadena, California. That is amazing. That's one of the most amazing statistics I have ever heard. And I probably would never hear that one again. So congratulations, Courtney, Lammy, and Jack Milne for that amazing feat. It blew me away. Every time I hear that, I just can't believe it. So Courtney went ahead and was in the World Championship 3 times in his career. The reason why he didn't become in that championship more years is that the World War II broke out, and all those guys had to leave and never come back. So they would have, really had more championships and more world championships. Cordy was actually billed to win world championship, but then the war broke out, and then Cordy had to come home and never, I believe, returned back to England. Just like today, there's a pandemic and the Speedway mostly stopped. And back then, the World War II broke out and Speedway mostly stopped. So sometimes in the history, things just have to slow down a little bit. And that's exactly what it did back in those days. So we talked about the 36th, 4th place at the Wembley Stadium as a rookie. And then the 37, Cordy got 3rd place on the podium. We just talked about it right now. And then the next year in 38, Cordy got 6th place in the World Championship. He was in 3 World Championships, 36, 37, and 38, and got 3rd, 4th, and 6th. So that's pretty amazing. So Courtney Milne was a hard charger, and he was a good rider, and